Hi everyone. Today we're going to begin talking about writing fiction. We're going to have some stories that you're going to read, and in preparation for you to be able to write your own stories. So what we're talking about with fiction, fiction of course means something that's not true. And we use that for stories that we're going to be telling that are not necessarily true. They don't have to be, sometimes students will think that means they have to be like, superheroes or something. That is completely not the case. Fiction just means something that you are making up as opposed to what you guys were doing for your picture assignments, which we called creative nonfiction, right? That's true. You told a story about something that happened in a picture. Now what you're going to do is you're going to tell a story that you make up. Now it may be based on some things that are real, but you can change things around. You can shape them so that it looks more like a story. And we're going to talk about what that means here, what it means to have a particular kind of story structure. Okay. Again, you're going to write stories about people who don't exist, right? Doing things that they, of course, have never done before. But again, they might seem like they're perfectly real. Again, you could write something that is fantastic, there's magic in it or something like that. But again, you completely don't have to. In fact, I kind of encourage you to kind of stick to something that is going to be a bit more a bit more real. So then we're going to talk about how it is that we structure a story. Now, on some level how stories are structured because you watch movies and television. I mean, that's fiction. Again, whether it's going to be a superhero movie or a romantic comedy or a family drama, whatever it is, all of those things are going to be fiction. They're all made up. Somebody wrote that, and that's what the actors are going to do. And so we're going to think about how stories end up building the conflict. How we go up towards the end is going to be the biggest thing that we're going to have, the biggest conflict, and then how we have some kind of idea afterwards about how we're supposed to think about that. So we want to think about that with this story. So we've got this story here, The Flowers by Alice Walker. It's a fairly short story. I'm going to read it to you. I've got all these notes off here on the if there are things that you're not sure about that are going on in the story. But one thing that I do want to mention before I read it that you're going to need to know in order to be able to understand what's happening in the story is something called lynching. Lynching was a practice that happened in the United States after the Civil War between about 1860s to about the 1960s or so. In some places, there's some times where it happened even later than that. But mainly about that 100 years or so after the Civil War, there's a situation where black people would be taken and hung in a tree usually, and it was kind of a spectacle, right? It's kind of a strange thing. They would sometimes they might have a black person who might be accused of a crime, and a mob would go down to the prison and take the person out, and instead of waiting for them to go to trial, they'd lynch them. And so sometimes, of course, people might have been hung when they were completely innocent. Sometimes they might have been hung for things that you would think that people wouldn't be killed for, right? That is, a lot of times black men were killed for expressing any kind of romantic interest in white women, right? That was a standard reason why men would be killed. And so there was a very common thing. If you want to look that up, you can go ahead and do that, but I'll, like Google it and you can learn some more about that. I will warn you that if you see any pictures of that, some of them are pretty bad. I mean, they would actually torture people before they would be hung. It's really, really terrible situation. It was a way of kind of keeping power, right? That is a way to say, hey, here we have people in the area that we don't want to have any power, and so we can terrorize them at will, right? We can terrorize them by dragging them out of their homes or dragging them out of jail and killing them. And so lynching is this important part of American history that we should know something about, right? It's kind of scandalous that we don't know more about that, that was, again, a standard practice primarily in the South, but in other places too. It happened in all states. But that it is something that unfortunately is a part of our history. But we just need to know that that exists in order to understand what's going to be happening with the story. So let's get to this story of the flowers. So it's called The Flowers, and I do want to make it. I do have a note over here saying titles are always an indication of what's important. If a title refers to an ordinary object, then that object is probably a symbol or a metaphor. That's because flowers themselves are not that important. Who's going to say, "I'm going to write this great story about flowers"? I'm like, but oh no, I'm going to write a story about flowers, but the flowers are going to be a symbol for something else. And we talked about symbolism before. And I say what is important is the meaning we put on flowers, such as the meaning we put on flowers for Valentine's Day or for funerals. So we can recognize that this title is going to be important. It has a symbolic meaning. That's something that you can think about when you're creating your stories. How is it that you might title them so that you're saying, oh, here is the big point that I want to be making without giving away just the specific idea. You might use a symbol or a metaphor that says this story is this, right? And so that's what's happening here. It's the flowers, right? Which is going to tell us that it is actually, that the flowers are actually going to be metaphorical or symbolic rather here. They're going to represent something here. So The Flowers by Alice Walker. It seemed to Mayop, as she skipped Pigpen to Smokehouse, that the days had never been as beautiful as these. The air held a keenness that made her nose twitch. The harvesting of the corn and cotton, peanuts and squash, made each day a golden surprise that caused excited little tremors to run up her jaw. Mayop carried a short, knobby stick. She struck out at random at chickens she liked, and worked out a beat of a song on a fence around the pig pen. She felt light and good in the warm sun. She was 10, and nothing existed for her but her song, the stick clutched in her dark brown hands, and the tat-de-tat-ta of accompaniment. Turning her back on the rusty boards of her family's sharecropper cabin, Mayop walked along the fence till it ran into the stream made by the spring. Around the spring, where the family got drinking water, silver ferns and wildflowers grew. Along the shallow banks, pigs rooted. Mayop watched the tiny white bubbles disrupt the thin black scale of soil, and the water slid away down the stream. She had explored the woods behind the house many times. Often in late autumn, her mother took her to gather nuts among the fallen leaves. Today she made her own path, bouncing this way and that, vaguely keeping an eye out for snakes. She found, in addition to various common but pretty ferns and leaves, an armful of strange blue flowers, with velvety ridges, and a sweetsuds bush full of the brown, fragrant buds. By 12 o'clock, her arms laden with sprigs of her findings, she was a mile or more from home. She had often been as far before, but the strangeness of the land made it not as pleasant as her usual haunts. It seemed gloomy in the little cove in which she found herself. The air was damp, the silence close and deep. Mayop began to circle back to the house, back to the peacefulness of the morning. It was then she stepped smack into his eye. Her heel became lodged in the broken ridge between brow and nose, and she reached down quickly, unafraid to free herself. It was only when she saw his naked grin that she gave a little yelp of surprise. He had been a tall man. From feet to neck covered a long space. His head lay beside him. When she pushed back the leaves and layers of earth and debris, Mayop saw that he had large white teeth, all of them cracked or broken, long fingers and very big bones. All his clothes had rotted away except for some threads of blue denim from his overalls. The buckles of the overalls had turned green. Mayop gazed around the spot with interest. Very near where she'd stepped into his head was a wild pink rose. As she picked it to add to her bundle, she noticed a mound, a ring around the rose's root. It was the rotted remains of a noose, a bit of shredding plow line now blending benignly into the soil. Around an overhanging limb of great spreading oak clung another piece, frayed, rotted, bleached and frazzled, barely there, but spinning. Mayop laid down her flowers. Summer was over. So, I said that you needed to know what lynching was, and it gets brought up here. Now, it doesn't get brought up as maybe as clearly, but let's see how it is here. She says she stepped down up here as she began to circle around the house, back to the peacefulness of the morning. It was then she stepped smack into his eyes. Smack into somebody's eyes. Whose eyes? Her heel became lodged in the broken ridge between brow and nose, right in here, and she reached down quickly, unafraid to free herself. It was only then when she saw his naked grin and gave a little yelp of surprise. She stepped into a skull. Um, Now, Walker doesn't say specifically skull here to kind of give us the sense of what it is she's seeing here, but that's where she's going to see that, right? Where we're going to see that. Her heel became lodged in the broken ridge between brow and nose, right? And then we can say he had been a tall man, from feet to neck covered a long space. His head lay beside him. That's a skeleton, right? When she pushed back the leaves and layers of earth and debris, she saw he'd had large white teeth, right? So again, we push back the leaves and we can see that there's a skeleton here. And then it's only when she is going to see the remains of a noose. A noose is going to be the rope that's used to hang people. Okay, it's only when she sees the remains. It was when she sees the noose that we can see that this person was lynched. Okay, and so that's we start off with Mayap in the story, and I'll let you. I have some comments in here that you can read yourself. But this seems like a nice day for her. She's 10. She obviously lives out in the country, right? They're harvesting. Uh, um, I say things like, they lived in a cabin, they got drinking water from a spring, right? So it's like a water that comes up from the ground, and that's where they get their drinking water. So she lives out in the country, and she's just wandering around in the country. At 10, that's, a kind of thing you might do out in the country. You can go wander around like that. And she seems to be having a great day collecting flowers, and it seems like a fun time for her to be wandering around in the woods like that. But then as she gets out farther away, that's when she finds this skeleton and sees there's a noose on it. And the story ends with summer was over. And what we need to think about that is that we're saying on some level that, well, summer is did suddenly summer change, right? Summer just doesn't end right there. What really happens with that? And what we might say is that what's happened with her is that her innocence is gone, right? Summer represents this time of innocence. She's out collecting flowers, she's having fun, but summer is over when she's going to stumble across this man who has been killed. She's black as well, right? As it mentions earlier, we can see it says that she has brown brown skin, and so it's a little farther in here. But in any case, it says that it's going to resonate with her. She realizes, oh, this is what can happen to people who look like me. And so when we talk about summer being over, she is saying on some level that her innocence is over. And so that's kind of what happens in the story. I'm going to pause right here, and I'm going to pick up in just a second for a second part of the video and talk some about the structure of this story and how that plays into how you can structure your own stories. So we'll pick it up with the next video.